So today I'm just going to talk about the best personality types for business. And in order, there would be ENTJ, ENFJ, ESTP, ESTJ, and INFJ. So I'd say ENTJ and ENFJ are tied together pretty close. It can go either way. You might say that ENFJs are better at business because they're more people oriented, and ENTJs are less people oriented because for ENFJs, they're people oriented, but for ENTJs, people are a means to an end. So they're not as good with people. It's more like how can I use these people to achieve my goal? Whereas ENFJs more genuinely enjoy just being around everyone. But ENTJs make up for that by being more strategic and more logical. So they might have less people power, but they have a better strategy. So that's why I would place the ENTJ first. Okay. And ESTPs tend to be very outgoing, charming, charismatic. You think of these people as typically salesmen, right? Buying and selling products. They're very good salesmen. Some websites would even label them as the entrepreneur. I think that's bullshit. I think most businesses would actually be started by ENTJs and ENFJs simply because ESTPs don't have the long term planning skills necessary to fully implement a business. They think too small. They just think more in the moment. So that's why they're more of salesmen. Donald Trump is an ESTP. So yeah, okay, he managed to become president. But real estate is more simplistic. It's more, buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. It's not very innovative. It's not like, oh, where do you see this company in 5 years? It's more of just you um you buy and sell, but you don't have to make a product, design it from scratch, test it with users. It's not a very complex thing. So ESTPs can become rich, but just in a more traditional dogmatic sense. Like they would open very simple businesses and just focus on short-term tactics to get a lot of them. So like I think there's one entrepreneur I've seen, a foreigner, who he's bought up a lot of gas stations. I think gas stations and also convenience stores, and I think he somehow managed to be a billionaire. So basically, I think that uh, he would be an ESTP. He could be again one of these other two, but I think an ESTP would do something like that. So they're a bit more simplistic. They don't really come up with complex ideas, but they're good when it comes to action. They're very action-oriented people. And then next you have ESTJs. So ESTJs are leaders and they're very detail oriented, but the problem is they don't like to take new risks, right? So they're usually very traditional people. Some of them are very numbers oriented. So I think ESTJ entrepreneurs would thrive more in the finance field, something a bit more quantitative, something detailed that it's just facts and figures, it's just numbers, and that's where they'll thrive. So I think ESTJs do have good leadership ability or capability, arguably third or fourth best. You could argue they're better leaders than the ESTPs. It's just ESTPs are much better at taking on risk and starting a new venture. So ESTJs very conservative. Most ESTJs' goal would be like to get into Harvard and work at a big company, like work at Facebook, work at Google, they thrive based on establishment, based on values, right? So that is kind of what limits the ESTJ, and they're also not big picture thinkers, so they're usually stuck at like middle management. Though some ESTJs can rise to very high positions, and definitely I think they have the highest average salaries. I think there's a poll done, I'll link it later. So overall, the biggest problem with ESTJs is they don't take risks. But obviously, you have entrepreneurs of every personality. So if an ESTJ is willing to take a risk, he would make money. They just enter very generic markets. They're sort of similar to the ESTP. They enter generic traditional markets. They can think a bit more long term. It's just they're looking at the past to see the needs of the future. So, like starting a meat farm, for example, selling meat, like maybe whoever is like the richest person selling meat could be an ESTJ, right? It's just a simple, understandable commodity, a basic commodity which really everyone needs, everyone wants. So the ESTJ is going to look at all the data and going to work out, okay, how can I sell this product? How can I corner this market? And they're hardworking, they're ambitious, they're workaholics. And next you have INFJs. So INFJs are literally the best introverts ever, the best, most well-balanced introverts, in the sense that if you were to be an introvert, you'd probably want to be an INFJ, because I think they have the perfect balance of intellect and people skills. So they have TI, they have NI, TI. So NI as the first function, TI as the third function. So it forms a very strong loop. Those are two of the most intellectual functions to have, because the INTP and the INTJ have those two functions as the dominant functions, and INTPs followed by INTJs are seen as being the most intellectual types. They also have FE, right? And ENFJs are seen as the most empathic people, the ones who understand people the best. So INFJs have it as their second function. So really well balanced people. I think Lex Friedman is actually an INFJ according to the test, but he seems to me more like a INTJ. I dispute that he's an INFJ, but essentially, an INFJ is sort of an introverted entrepreneur. So they're long term thinkers. They have the NI, so they can think like INTJs. They can think 10, 15, 20 years into the future, but they have the FE. So where the INTJ would fail is that they don't have the FE necessary to convince people, to use charm, to use charisma, to be like, hey, let's actually do this idea. Let's invest in my idea. And INFJ would. They would know how people tick. They would know how people think. They would be able to convince people to work for them, able to convince people to invest in the idea. It's really smooth sailing for them. It's just some INFJs can be a bit unhinged by the by the FE. So they tend to be quite spiritual. So most of them might prefer to be religious leaders rather than entrepreneurs. And the inferior function is SE. So they do have a bit of problem with details, but I think an INFJ would be able to get one of these other types to um, work for them. So I think that'll be the end of part one, and I'll explain more in part two.